You're 2 months into the school year and you've come to a stark realization. Your students are behind. It may just be a handful of students or maybe even an entire class, but either way, you've realized that they are behind and you don't know what to do. You're struggling with the decision to either slow down and catch everyone up or just kind of forge ahead and hope that those that are behind will eventually figure it out. So which is the lesser of two evils? Is there a middle ground? And let's not forget the added complexity of students with IEPs, English learners, those with learning disabilities or behavior issues that are just kind of adding to this whole picture. So how do we get this done? Is it even possible? In this episode, I'm going to go over my method for catching up students, whether it's 5 or 50. And while you won't be able to catch everyone up realistically, you can at least get them further ahead so that they don't feel like they just want to completely give up. Because let's be real, trying to catch up all students that are at varying levels is trying to run with a handful of sand and not drop even one grain. We can only do our best, but with some reinforcements, we can do better. Now, one thing that a lot of us could do better is hitting that like and subscribe button so that you won't miss out on any helpful and actionable content like this. So the first step in this method is obviously identifying the problem. That's not to say that just being behind isn't a problem in and of itself, but we need to figure out what is going on and get a bigger picture. How can you tell if your students are behind? Well, for one, you can look at assessments, the baseline data that you have, so you can look at where they started on a particular skill and what their grades are now. I would also look at grades not only in your class, but if you have access to it, grades in other classes or other subjects. And then also you can look at their behavior, because sometimes students check out not because they necessarily don't want to learn or do something, it's because they're behind and they don't really know what to do. I mean, I for one can tell you that I don't like to feel stupid. I don't think anyone likes to feel stupid. But a lot of students definitely don't want to speak up for themselves because they feel stupid and they don't want to admit it. So rather than trying and feeling even more stupid, they would just rather not do any work at all and just come off as just being too cool for it or just thinking it's a waste of time. So now that you've assessed whether or not they're behind and you realize, yes, they are behind. There's missing assignments or their grades are really low in your class or other classes or they're just not getting it. Now you need to figure out why. And this one can be a little bit tricky. So are they behind because they're below level? That's definitely a possibility. They could have missed a bunch of time from absences, or they might have come from another district, so that other district maybe moves at a slower pace than yours. Maybe you have to look at language proficiency. If you have English learners, they definitely have a possibility of being behind your other students because not only are they trying to learn the content, they're trying to understand the language. Also, as I mentioned previously, there could be absences. So these are absences that are obviously out of your control, but if they're gone because they were sick, or they're gone because they just don't show up for school and nobody notices, or their parents decide that they need to go to Cabo in the middle of the school year, that could definitely be a reason why those students are behind. Also, life circumstances. If the student's parents are going through a divorce or there was a death in the family or an illness, that definitely will be distracting for the student and definitely put them in a mindset where they don't necessarily want to do any work, whether it's in school or outside of school. Also, sometimes a whole class can be behind because of mandatory events like state testing, or maybe there's like an assembly at your school or some kind of activity that you cannot get out of and your students have to do, and so it could mess up your pacing. We actually had this happen recently because we had a very last minute fire/earthquake drill, and it was just for one class period. So that one class was definitely behind all my other classes because they lost about 45 minutes worth of instruction. So there could just be circumstances beyond your control in the school day that put a whole class behind. And then of course we have just plain old apathy, and that's why a student doesn't want to do their work. They just don't feel like it. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. When I come across these types of issues where students just don't do anything, part of me gets kind of upset, kind of triggered inside. It's like, why won't you do this? And I think this happens to a lot of us, but we also have to be empathetic and honestly not be hypocrites about it. I mean, we all fall into one of two categories and maybe somewhere in the gray area, where when you were a student, you either got your work done and followed the rules, or you saw no point in what you were doing and just didn't really do much and maybe barely passed. Something like that. Or somewhere in between. But my point is, you have students that just don't want to work. They just don't want to do anything, and it's not necessarily a reflection of their parents or if you're teaching, they just don't want to work. And if you were that kind of student, kind of hard to justify being really mad at them because you get it. You were there. For me, someone who did get my work done, it is really frustrating for me to see students who just sit there and don't even try because I don't understand their mindset. It's not that I never found anything pointless when I was in school, but I still did my work because that's what you were supposed to do. So we have to have empathy for these students. We can't get overly indignant or take it personally because they don't want to do the work that we assign them. I'm not saying that we're going to blame anybody or make excuses for these students. I mean, they're behind, and sometimes it is their fault and sometimes it's not. But either way, we just have to try to figure out why, because that does influence moving forward how we're going to catch them up. The second step is to develop a plan. This is going to depend on how many students are behind, and again, if it's just a few students or if it's a whole class. So you need to ask yourself these questions. Is it enough for students to just demonstrate proficiency and mastery? Or is it about them getting the work done and getting the grade for it? And you may be asking, why can't I have both? Well, the answer is because your students are behind, so you have to prioritize. So either you want the kids to get the work done and complete it and turn it in and give them a grade no matter how they do on it, or you are going to have students demonstrate proficiency and maybe not get all of the work done, but at least they demonstrated that they know what they're doing. If they're behind, they don't have time to do both and still catch up to the rest of the class. So you need to have that tough conversation with yourself. This also begs the question, what is the bare minimum that your students need to do to catch up and be on pace? So for example, let's say that you have a math assignment with 20 problems. Can they do 5 and prove whether or not they understand the material? Do they need to do all 20 for compliance, or can they just show you the bare minimum and still get full credit? Now, you may be thinking, well, if I do this all the time, then students aren't going to finish my assignments. But we need to try to give the students the benefit of the doubt and just try to get them caught up, because sometimes what you're battling is the negative mindset. Sometimes you're just battling them, telling themselves that they can't do it, and they get overwhelmed. They feel like they're drowning in these late assignments and they won't even try. If you can give them a lifeline and tell them that, you know what, show me that you can do this, and maybe they get it done in 5 or 10 problems instead of 20, then they're more likely to have more of a positive mindset moving forward and are more likely to do your work in the future. Maybe you only have like a handful of students that are behind. You're definitely going to have a plan and strategize how you're going to go about this so that you're not necessarily creating more work and creating more frustration, because I get it. There are times when I'm just really over it and I don't want to catch them up. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, why do I care more about your education than you do? And then I get upset and I don't want to do anything about it, and I kind of throw a mini tantrum. And then I get over myself, because at the end of the day, I do care if they learn. The thing is, the further they fall behind, the more frustrated I become. And maybe you're like, fine, just let them fail. And maybe their parents are like, fine, you can just fail. But at some point, I feel like someone in their lives, whether it's us or their family or another teacher, someone has to believe in them and believe that they can do this. And I'd honestly prefer that it be me at the end of the day. So here are the things that I actually do. Number one, I do offer one-on-one assistance, and I'm able to do this now more so than ever because I am using the modern classroom project model, where students are more self-paced and they're working more independently, and so it gives me more one-on-one time. If you're not doing that model, you can still build in time where you can work with students one-on-one while other students are doing group work or individual work. So it's really key that you build this relationship with that student so that you can catch them up. And I do my best to not get mad at them or take it personally. I know it sounds weird, but sometimes we do take it personal when a student isn't doing our work. We get upset because they're not complying. So it almost feels like an affront to us. But we just have to be objective about it and just see that, hey, the student is behind. The student is not doing the work. The student may be below grade level. How can you get mad at someone for being below level? It's not their fault. And even if it is, getting mad about it isn't going to solve the problem. I also would give them a new set of materials. So some teachers say, well, I already gave you that assignment. I already made that copy for you. If I give them the assignment, they're going to lose it anyway. Just give them another packet. Give them another worksheet. Seriously, you just want to make it so that they can do the work right then and there. If they have to look through their binder or dig through their backpack through crumpled papers to look for that assignment to do it, you're slowing things down. They're less likely to get that work done. Give them a fresh new packet and just move on. Have additional resources prepared if the student is behind because they're just at a lower level. So this could mean maybe showing them videos, or if you have past worksheets or assignments that they did before but they didn't really get it, have them do that again. I would also have maybe some websites or additional resources for them to refer to so that it's not just you trying to catch them up. There's also putting some responsibility on them to learn the material in addition to what you've already taught them. It can be frustrating. You're like, I already gave a lecture on that. I already taught them how to do that and they weren't there for that or they didn't pay attention. So how am I going to do this again for one student? If I gave a 20-minute lecture, am I really going to give a 20-minute lecture for this one student? No, you're not. You're going to find other lectures online or just other resources so that you can stick them aside and they could learn that material while you're working with the rest of your class. Communicate with the parents so that they understand that you're trying to catch up the student. There needs to be buy-in on the parent side too, and while I know that's not always going to happen because there just isn't always parent involvement, let them know so that if they are likely to help out their student or be involved or at least hold them accountable, you have someone else on your side who's working with you. Make sure that you check in with them. This is something that I've been bad about in the past where I'm trying to catch students up, then I forget to check and see if they actually did it. So maybe 2-3 days pass and it never got done because if you forget about them, they're just gonna, slump down in their chair and just try to be under the radar again because they don't want to have to do the work. You have to remember that they're definitely in this self-defeating mindset, and so just these little wins when they're getting something accomplished, even if they got 5 problems done and you gave them 10, that is something. I'll even walk around and see a student, if they get 1 problem done, I give them a lot of praise if it's someone who normally doesn't get anything done. And I'll say, awesome, you got that 1 question done and it was correct. Let's try to get to 5. Okay, after you get to 5, you can take a little mental break, and this just gives them a goal and they can look forward to just having a break like I promised, and it also encourages them because they feel like they're actually accomplishing something. The third step is to adjust instruction, and this applies to when you have a class or maybe all of your students that are behind. It's the same mindset as with an individual student where you have to ask yourself the tough questions. Can they just demonstrate proficiency or mastery? Do you really need them to get all of the assignments done? For example, we have grammar worksheets that we give out, and for each particular part of speech or something like that, there's like 20 questions. Do I really need to do all 20 with the students? Can I get away with just doing 5? And if it seems like they have it, then we move on. If they don't, let's go to 10. And if by 10 they have it, let's move on. Do we really care more about making sure that they get it all done and they get the grade for that particular assignment? Or do we care more about them just knowing the content? There's definitely a difference when you're trying to catch students up. If you are on pace, you have the luxury of doing both. But when you're behind, like I was with that one class because of the fire drill, I had to make a decision about what I could keep and what I had to cut. Then you want to look at your pacing guide. You want to see what are all the assignments that you're supposed to complete before a certain amount of time. Maybe it's an upcoming assessment, or maybe it's like a break or a holiday. Where are your students at and where do they need to be by a certain cutoff point? Maybe the end of a unit. What is the shortest path there? Sometimes we're teaching things that are must-haves and are nice to knows. So you can distinguish between those and just kind of cut out the nice to know. So maybe you're teaching them a particular concept, but you had like an extension or a fun activity or project that you were going to do with them. Well, we got to cut that out and just do the basic meat and bones. It is just not humanly possible to teach every single standard that we're being asked to teach. And after teaching all this time, I realized that I care more about depth rather than breadth. Meaning, I'd rather teach a few things really well and go deep with those concepts rather than just kind of covering everything. And because what I found is that when I'm just trying to cover a lot of things, the students don't necessarily know the material well. And so when they're assessed, maybe with like a district assessment or standardized testing, the students don't do well because I only covered it, I only touched on it, but they didn't really learn it. So the final step is to seek specialized support. It's just not possible to get every student on the same page and the same level, and it's often out of your control. You're going to get students that are 1 to 2 grade levels behind, and you're just going to have to deal with it. You'll also have students with learning disabilities, behavioral or emotional challenges, speech or language difficulties, and they just need specialized support in general. And yes, we are trained to help them out with that and know how to accommodate for them in the classroom, but sometimes there are just things that we need a specialist for to show us how to do it. For example, there are reading and language specialists, there are speech therapists. In some schools, there's a special class for English language learners that just came to the country. You also have special education specialists. These specialists can help you know how to accommodate and support those students that need extra help beyond what you know how to do. Even as a veteran teacher, I can't help all of them all of the time. I'm not capable of knowing how to make a bajillion different accommodations for all of my students, so I will seek help from different specialists. For example, if I know that my student is going to the speech therapist and they're having a hard time articulating themselves in class or with their group members, I'll ask the speech therapist what has worked for that student or in other classes. So I definitely seek out help from different people because I know I can't do it all by myself. And find out what options are available if you want a student to be assessed for special services. So maybe you suspect that a student needs some extra help. Maybe you suspect that they're having difficulty concentrating and learning. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have ADHD, but maybe they are showing some of the patterns of a student that is ADHD. Or maybe you learned that a student just recently moved to this country and does not really know English and they were accidentally placed in your class. In that case, you want to seek special services for that. These are all things that can cause a student to fall behind, and so if you can get them the appropriate services, or at least get appropriate support for yourself, that can really help you catch them up too. So these are some of the basic things that you can do to at least try to catch them up. If the student is really digging their heels in and they don't want to catch up and they don't want to do the work, well then you just gotta let that go. Even if it's just adjusting your expectations, adjusting your instruction, that alone can really catch up students so that they feel successful, and then you can breathe the sigh of relief that you've kind of done everything that you could. Now, this episode is definitely similar to a previous episode where I discussed what to do when students are all at different levels, so I would definitely click on this video next so that you can catch that.